The path of an artist is full of challenges, which has pushed me to reach out to other professionals about their experiences. Join us as we explore the journeys of fine artists who have turned their passion of creating art into a profession. From their highs to their hurdles, these are real insights, breakthroughs, and triumphs to inspire other creators to reach higher. Welcome to the Business of Art podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the Business of Art podcast. Today I am excited to introduce our guest, Megan Wimberley. Megan is a contemporary Western and wildlife artist based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and her paintings are influenced by her experiences growing up with animals and living the authentic Western lifestyle. A lot of horses involved in that area. Her work highlights the hard work of ranchers and the roles that women play in those spaces, along with the wildlife stuff that she does. Megan earned a Bachelor of Arts in Fine Arts from the Wayland Baptist University, and then a Master of Arts in Art Education from Boston University. After starting her career in 2016, she took some time away due to illness and a diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. But thanks to effective treatment and a holistic approach to health, she's now back to work. Megan is also the founder of Cowgirl Artists of America, which is an organization dedicated to increasing opportunities for female Western artists. Welcome to the show, Megan. We're thrilled to have you. And let's get started. I guess first off, we would love to hear your story, your journey, how it all began. You know, you can talk about your early years, you know, your whatever that involves up till now. We want to hear all about it.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here, and congratulations on all of the stuff that you're doing in your podcast. It's so exciting to see all of that happening.
Thank you.
But yeah, so I grew up around horses. Horses have always been one of the major loves of my life. Unfortunately, I don't get to ride them so much anymore, be around them as much as I used to, but hopefully one day in life we'll get back to that. But my mom was a Western artist, super obsessed with horses as well. And so I definitely just grew up around the horses. I've always really loved animals. And so I grew up drawing horses. Those of you in the quarter horse and paint horse associations, you know, we get those magazines, and I was always flipping through them and drawing all the horses. And Mom, does this look right? What do I need to do? I remember once drawing this Arabian, and I was like, did I get the dished face right? And she just kept saying more and more. And I was like, really, more? But so I was always just wanting to draw and to get better at drawing. And I did drawing for a long time. And I'm really happy, looking back, that I was able to learn from her in the ways that I was, because I didn't have a lot of opportunities for art education in school until I got to college. I only had 2 art classes all the way through grade school.
Is this also in Oklahoma, or where was this?
No, it was in Texas. So I lived most of my life in Texas. I went to school in Guthrie, Oklahoma 1 year in high school. And then my undergraduate degree was in Texas, in Plainview, which is West Texas. Okay. And I just kind of ended up there. It was weird, random, just chain of events. It's so funny how life goes. But I think I had art as my minor at first. And I, for the most part, put myself through college. And so I remember talking to the head of the art department saying, hey, are there more scholarships available? And she said, well, there are, but you have to be an art major. So I double majored, and art was one of the majors. And I got to go through that and learn a whole lot of things. I'm really glad that I majored in that, because it was the first time I really started painting. Cool. Yeah. So I did always these very tight, realistic drawings. And then in art school, I kind of did a lot of experimental stuff with the painting. And so I got to have that opportunity. And then when I graduated, I went into photography for a little while. It just seemed like maybe an easier way to make a business, and photography was really big at the time. And so, photography is always big, but it was I feel like there was a big push for like helping art photographers as business owners. And so that was really my introduction to business and running an art business. And so I worked part-time at Starbucks, very frustrating after having a bachelor's degree, but worked part-time at Starbucks and did my photography business. And eventually I started working. I've done a lot of work with people with developmental disabilities. And so I started doing that. That's been a passion of mine for a long time, and still did the photography on the side. The photography never really picked up to like the degree I wanted it to, but it was so formative in learning how to build a website, to do a blog, to learn all these really important things that I think a lot of artists don't realize are so important. And so then I realized that I really wanted to be able to go a different direction in life. And I had this idea to start a art studio for adults with developmental disabilities. And so my professor from college, I said, hey, should I do like an art therapy degree? And she said, no, that will take you forever. Get an master's in art education. So I did. And I worked for, I think, about 8 years at this school for children, K through 12, for kids with learning and developmental disabilities, mostly learning disabilities. And I did art for K through 12 and did my painting on the side. And in the meantime, doing all this, I had met a friend who, man, this is such a disconnected story. I hope it makes sense to everyone, but
no, you're good. You're good. Keep going.
Okay. So I met a friend she's an equestrian. I went to her house and her style was so colorful and different and bold. And she had these textiles. And I mean, she had this like fake deer head that was made out of like quilts and stuff. And it occurred to me the first time ever that I don't have to be realistic with everything. I can like do this Western and wildlife art that I love, and I can play with color. And so I started doing pastels, really colorful, very ugly stuff. So if you're listening, I truly believe you have to make the ugly work to make the beautiful work. So embrace it, love it, appreciate it, because it's so important. I made lots of very ugly work, and slowly over the years, I switched to acrylic, and now I have a style that I feel like is pretty specific to me that I've just developed from putting in a lot of hard hours in painting. In 2016, and we can go into detail more, but I got very sick and was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and kind of took me away from my art for a while. And now I'm back at it. And in 2021, I started Cowgirl Artists of America. So it's kind of during the pandemic. We all had some extra time on our hands, and that's when I did it. So that's kind of the story, and not so much of a nutshell.
Yeah, no, but that's great. And, there's a lot of points in there that I think are interesting. And as I've been doing these interviews, hearing just the different approaches and the different paths that people are taking, it's fascinating how broad all of these different paths are leading people into a professional art career. So maybe I'll ask you a little bit about your educational experience. You got a Bachelor of Arts in Fine Art from that. It was at the Wayland Baptist University in Texas, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then you got a Master of Arts at Boston University.
Master of Art Education.
Master of Art Education. Thank you. So how did those two, were those like back-to-back sequential, or was there time in between those two?
There was actually quite a bit of time in between them. So I graduated with my undergrad in 2009, and then I graduated with my master's in 2015. And I think it was about a year and a half long program. So there was quite a bit of space between, several years between.
Okay. So tell us about that experience. Going through that education. I think a lot of artists, I don't know. There's a lot of artists that go through an art education, and there's those who go more like the workshop route or studying under other artists. How do you feel that has affected your career and your growth as an artist? Yeah.
So I really think one thing that a lot of people don't consider when they think about having a formal art education from like a university is that different teachers have different pedagogies, different ways of approaching how they teach. And so most of my teachers were a little bit more hands off. They really wanted you to do the work, and then they were there to support you. And so there wasn't a lot of, like in like some of the more traditional schools, you might be doing step-by-step process work. And those two things are going to lead towards different approaches and different understandings and different things you learn. So even if you're like an artist who does not have a formal college education, that's not a bad thing, because you're going to find your ways to learn. And the most important thing is that you're open to learning and open to really putting in the work. I think in college, it was a good place for me to experiment with something different. I don't know that I would have started painting had I not been in those courses that required painting. And, we had some illustration courses and design courses. So you kind of learn little bits of different things here and there. And then I've always been kind of a person, which I'm reining this in just a little bit because it's starting to get me in trouble, but I'll have an idea and I just start going with it. And so I remember I did my senior practicum, which was a great experience to have a show in a gallery where you're having to like really put forth that work. But I also did like a solo show just kind of on a whim the year before I graduated at a winery in Lubbock. And it was just outdoors and I invited people. And so I think those experiences, in college, a lot of times, even if you are putting yourself through college, there's some freedom there that you're not going to have later on in your life. And so I don't know that, I'm trying to think about like, how did that influence? I think just the experience as a whole, gave me the freedom. I think that's what it was. The freedom to kind of stretch myself and to do some different things. And then to get that feedback from the professor and from the students was really helpful.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting. So would you say that the program was more of a traditional program, or was it, because I know there's a lot of art programs out there that it's very cerebral and talk, like you're focusing on self-expression without, approaching realism or reality.
Mm-hmm.
What was the program like?
I really think it was very free. And I think maybe that's why I'm having a hard time like saying like that, because if I did a traditional approach in my undergrad, I think it would be easy for me to say I was forced to practice these techniques and I was forced to learn this. And it was much more of the approach of, as the teacher, I'm kind of like here to come alongside you. Like, I'm going to give you some assignments. I'm here to help you, but you need to put in the work. Yeah. And so, I remember one point I just couldn't get the color that I wanted. And I was like, I can't get this, and I talked to the professor and she's like, oh, you're using the wrong color. Come in, like, let me show you this color and you can use this. So it was kind of more like that. But a lot of it, I think it was just that requirement of, you're going to do a lot of painting. You're going to spend some time in the ceramic studio. You're going to play and explore, but so like I said, were some like requirements as far as like, you have to make a certain number or you have to make XYZ. But beyond that, there was a lot of freedom in how students approached it.
That's really interesting. So you probably had a really wide range of work from the students.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So, you mentioned the idea that, if you don't have a formal college education, that's not a bad thing. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think that in a lot of ways, there's from at least hearsay from things I've heard and different art programs. It's like one artist I interviewed recently, he's like, man, I went to a workshop and in a week I learned more than I learned in like almost all of my undergraduate experience, because I was hands-on. I was with an artist who knew what they were doing, and they were doing what I was wanting to do, and it just clicked, Mm-hmm. And so, I really appreciated my undergraduate experience. It was very traditionally based, lots of design, the elements and principles of a design, and specific assignments around those things. And we talked about, we harped on composition, and I was in an illustration program. And so it was all very, very objective. those basic fundamentals. And I'm really grateful for that, because I feel like I developed the skills I needed to then run with and play with and, explore with. But it gave me a really great foundation. But I think there's not as many programs like that around, and a lot of them aren't. If they are, they're very expensive. Mm-hmm. A lot of the programs are just crazy expensive, and I think student loan debt is a big issue. And so I typically, when I'm talking to artists who are just getting started and they're looking at education, I typically recommend that they go find an artist that they admire and see if they can, go do a studio visit, watch them work, and maybe, maybe kind of approach them from a mentee-mentor situation. What are your thoughts along those lines?
Yeah, I think there's not a wrong approach, and I think checking in with yourself to say, like, realistically, like, where am I with my time? Where am I with my energy? Where am I with my finances? And what feels right, and to consider that really mindfully. But yeah. I think all approaches are very valid. I think if you do go to a college for your art degree, it would be good to ask the professors, what is your pedagogy and approach on teaching? Like, are you going to really force those fundamentals into me, or is this more freeform? Because you may want one thing versus another. If you're a young person, sometimes, and even older people, we don't know what we don't know. Like, that is the fact for all of us. If you don't know, you don't even know that you don't know it. And so, like, you might think you want one thing, but it might not really be the best for you. So just being mindful about it. I took in my graduate course, we did do a couple of studio courses, and they were pretty condensed. But I did one on color mixing, and it blew my mind. Like, it definitely took my work to the next level. Like, I see that as a turning point. And so I think no matter what you do, finding those opportunities, whether it's doing a workshop, finding a mentor, finding a good YouTube channel, whatever it is, to learn those things. And I still, like, that sometimes I'll be like, man, I'm really not loving the way I'm approaching this, and I'll watch a YouTube video or something and just see what other people are doing. Art is one of those things that, I'm putting in quotes, there's a right way to do it, but there's no right way to do it. So it can get very confusing, but I do suggest that people at least know the rules so that they know how to break them.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think there's some people who have really, really rigid ideas around art and what makes good art and also terrible art. And I think that we have to be careful as to, especially early on, who we listen to and who we take stock from, as far as their ideas and some of these rigid ways of thinking around art. Because I think, especially as time has gone on, we have so many resources and so much available to us that it's broadened our ability to be successful in so many different avenues with art. Yeah. And I think, there's never been a better time than now to be really explorative and to kind of break the so-called rules. Yeah. But I think also having both sides of that education, is going to be helpful, so that you, like, when you do break the rules, at least kind of what you're doing, and you're doing it deliberately. You're actually consciously making a choice to do that.
Right. And like with an architect, an architect can't just be like, yeah, I'm going to take out that wall because I want it open. He or she has to understand, like, is that a supporting wall? And it's the same thing with art. There are elements in our composition that support things. There are reasons that certain things work or don't work. And there's ways that you can change, not do that in order to make a statement. One thing I do want to go back very briefly, just for the college thing. If you do go to college to be an art major, I always recommend that you at least get a business minor, because as your podcast suggests, art is a business. You can be the best artist in the world and die poor. Nobody will ever know about you if you don't know how to market your work and take care of business.
Yeah, no, I think that's extremely valuable. And I think even probably more than anything, if you have the foundational understanding of how to run and manage a business, there's finances, the taxes, structuring your pricing and all that stuff that's stuff that you, as us artists who are free, it's like we don't want to think about that stuff, but it's a reality. If you want to make a living with this, even part-time, you have to understand some of those concepts of running business. So yeah, that's one thing I wish I had more of in college, was that business aspect. And I was fortunate to have some, but man, I wish I would have had 10 times the business training I did. But fortunately it's all worked out. Anyway, let's kind of shift gears a little bit. In your bio, it talks about your diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. And I think that there's so many artists out there that have something in their life that's a challenge, that's it may be stopping them or slowing them down. And I would love to hear your experience around that and how you've been able to deal with it and work around it and work with it. I think that's going to be really valuable to hear.
Yeah. So I had been painting. My business had been really growing a lot. And at the time I was married, and I had been getting sicker and sicker. And as I had been getting sicker and sicker, my ex also suffered from a traumatic brain injury. And so there was just a ton of stuff that happened at once. I had commissions. I had to call and be like, hey, these are going to be late. This is what's going on. And luckily everybody was so, supportive about that. But as I got more and more sick, and stress, and I'll talk about this more, but stress contributes to illness so much. Yeah. And as those things in life got more and more stressful, I got more and more sick. And I had a point in my life where I'm not exaggerating, I literally did not know how to paint anymore. I would sit down at my easel and I'd be like, Megan, put paint on the palette. You can do it. Like, just put the paint on there and just get started. You'll be fine. I would put the paint out and I would look at it, and I would look up at my painting, and my paintings are painted very intuitively. And it's a communication for me. My painting process is a communication with those colors and that subject. It's not there. And I would just get up and walk away. I did not know. My brain did not have the ability to do what it was doing before. And that was really scary. And it was scary to be getting sick. It was about 8 years ago. I'm almost 39. So, early 30s. Yeah. And I had all these weird symptoms. I mean, I felt like I was going crazy. I felt like nobody was listening to me. I was in the ER all the time. I mean, just all these things. And I just kept telling people, I just need somebody to put all these pieces together, but nobody's communicating with anybody.
Yeah. And
finally, I got a doctor that ran extensive tests and then also referred me to a rheumatologist. And statistically speaking, especially for young women, it is really hard to get diagnoses for chronic conditions. They're often, it's easy for people to write them off as, oh, that's like menstrual pain, or it's whatever, it kind of, you're young and you look healthy. And so, and for me, nothing was showing up in my blood work, but I have a family history of autoimmune conditions. And so this rheumatologist was able to run some additional tests and give me that diagnosis. And they put me on medication, and I was really anxious about taking the medications, especially one, which is a low dose chemo pill, which sounds very scary to me.
Yeah.
And so, but I also, my aunt has RA very bad, and they didn't have good medications, and she has very disfigured fingers and really has had a very tough time. And so I also understand the importance of accessing that medical treatment. And so, for anybody struggling with a illness or anything, I really truly believe, because stress contributes so much, be as positive as you can possibly muster. Because at the end of the day, and I'm not saying don't just pretend like nothing's wrong. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But at the end of the day, being positive about things and proactive and hoping for the best and believing the best is going to happen, at the very least, isn't going to hurt you.
Yeah.
It may not do anything, but it's not going to hurt you unless you're ignoring your doctor's advice. Whereas if you approach everything with stress and anxiety, it will hurt you. I mean, you can read so many books about how stress triggers this cascade of hormones and things in our body. And so with this low dose chemo pill that I was really afraid of taking, for me, and so for whoever's listening, this will be whatever, way you access this part of you. But I grew up in the Christian faith, and I decided that when I took this medicine, I would do the sign of the cross and say, Lord, please bless this to the healing and not the harm of my body. And I just had to believe that, because I saw so many people saying this medicine makes me sick and I can't blah, 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 And so whatever way it is for you that you can bring that positivity and that belief, and I'm going to try this and give it the opportunity, with the exception of a couple of times being slightly nauseous, I so far, knock on wood, have never had a problem with that medication. And I think if I would have approached it with, this is going to make me sick and I'm going to feel terrible, I think it would have done those things to me. So I just took a very holistic approach. I was like, whatever the doctor tells me to do, I'm going to do, which he's very good about, listening to me and seeing what I want. And then I was like, I'm going to do yoga and I'm going to eat healthy and I'm going to exercise. And I just did all the things that I could do. And I don't take for granted that I could get very sick again. That's a possibility for sure. But I do try to manage my stress, and just embrace every day that I can. And I'm getting better at it. We always have things we can let go of, but trying my best to embrace every day to the fullest extent, knowing that, this is true for everybody. You could wake up tomorrow and get into a car accident and have a brain injury and lose the ability to walk. Every single ability that you have is not guaranteed. And I am more aware of that as a person with a chronic health condition, but it's true of all of us. And so just being grateful for our abilities and embracing them. And then with the art, I think you have to be gentle with yourself. In that moment that I couldn't paint, I just couldn't. I had to go and sit on the couch and watch Parks and Rec and America's Funniest Home Videos and try to laugh, that's what I had to do. And that's okay. Yeah. And so if you need to go take a nap today because you are having a migraine or whatever, okay, go, it's okay. Go take a nap. You're all right, because stress is only going to make it worse. But then how do you be proactive about finding ways of healing so that you can go back to your art? And I'd recommend anybody who's struggling with because sometimes maybe you've broken your arm and you can't paint, or you have Parkinson's or whatever it is. There's a TED Talk called Embrace the Shake about an artist who developed a tremor in his arm. And he talks about how that affected his art and the way that he embraced it. So it is hard. I hear you. I see you. When you're struggling, whatever it is hard. And it's okay to talk about it. And it is not only okay, but really necessary that you just be kind and gentle to yourself the way you would to your best friend or your kid or your partner. You need to give yourself the same compassion.
That's really powerful, Megan. I love that approach. And a couple of questions is, I'm assuming you have specific practices that you do to mitigate and minimize the stress in your life. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the routines that you probably do? I think that would be valuable. So
yeah, sure. So I am still learning a lot of this, but one of the first things I did was I learned to set boundaries, because so many of us, I think, are, maybe if you're a people pleaser, a lot of women tend to fall into this category. If you, just depending on how you were raised or how you were in your family, if you're somebody who really wants to please other people, a lot of times you're not very good at setting boundaries. Somebody might ask you to do something and in your heart, you're like, I don't have time for that. And what comes out of your mouth? Sure, I'll do that for you. And so taking some time for yourself and saying, what is it that I'm okay with? what are areas in my life where that are causing me stress, and who or what is contributing to them, including myself. And then what's my plan of action? And I have worked off and on with one amazing therapist since I got sick, and she's incredible. And having somebody that you can go to who really does give you good advice and tools is very valuable. I think depending on if you have a faith community, if that's something that's part of your life, like that can be very valuable. Or an art community, Calvary Arts of America, we're very, we really want to support each other. Those things, they just help lift you up. But then I have been very stressed recently with the Calvary Artists of America stuff, just because the workload has been very hard. It's been a lot, and that's a good thing, but it's a blessing and a curse sometimes when there's growth.
Yeah.
And so trying to learn how to manage those things a little bit better. But I was just recently on a silent retreat, and I'm starting new practices because and this is part of being gentle with yourself as you're growing and managing your stress. You don't know what you don't know. Yeah. And so I learned some things recently at the silent retreat that I either didn't know or couldn't really process fully. And so now something I'm doing that is helping me a lot is I'm paying attention to, for me, I have a tendency to approach things with what I'm calling like a buzzy energy. So I will be answering an email, frantically typing, and my chest feels the bzzz, like this energy. And I realize that I am approaching almost all of my tasks all day long as if they are an emergency. And so I am taking a breath when I feel that, and I'm forcing myself to slow down. I'm starting the morning with stretching and mindfulness. First thing out of bed, I do not get on my phone until about an hour later. I do stretching and mindfulness. I eat breakfast, and then I go sit on the patio with a warm drink and do some reading that I feel like is pertinent to mindfulness or personal growth. Yeah. And then I'm just being really careful about listening to myself, listening to how I'm feeling, and refocusing on one thing at a time. I became the master of multitasking. I know they say you can't be good at it, but I was. And I discovered that even my recreation included multitasking work, which is not healthy.
Right.
So refocusing on those things. And then in the evening, I check in. In my little notebook, I say, okay, how did today feel? And that's how I start the day, with how do I want today to feel? And then at the end of the day, how did the day feel? Is there anything I learned? Is there anything I left for tomorrow? And I've only been doing that since this weekend, so not very long, but I can feel a huge difference in the way that I feel, the way I'm able to relax at night. It's very easy to get yourself hyped up constantly, especially if you've had any sort of trauma in your life. Our bodies get kind of this hardwired repeating pattern, so that even though answering that email is not a traumatic situation, we approach it with that same level of energy because our bodies almost become addicted to these stress hormones that they're producing.
Interesting. I think it makes sense. And I wish I'd understood more about all of these things, because I feel like there's times in my life where I'm super stressed out. I've got 6 kids, and this is the main source of income as an artist. And I think there's times when we kind of get in this go mode, and it's like, I've got to be producing, I got to be painting, and we neglect ourselves, and regardless of what your situation is, it's easy to get in that mindset where it's like, if I'm not producing, I'm not creating income, and therefore I'm failing. But if we have too many days and too much time in that direction and neglecting ourselves, there's going to be a price to pay. Mm-hmm. One way or another. And so I've actually, I listen to a lot of, self-help books and mindset and habits and things like that, ways to reduce stress. I'm always listening to stuff like that. But lately I've been doing something similar in just trying to have a better morning routine. Having mindfulness, I pray, I read some scriptures, as a Christian, that's a big part of what I do. But it's like, I'm not getting onto my phone first thing, it's, and I think that's one of the easiest ways for me to dive into stress is to open the phone, look at emails, see what's happening or not happening on social media, all these things that I've kind of, hardwired my brain into doing on a consistent basis. It's like, it's out of habit more than anything. And I'm trying to break that cycle. And I'm finding that as I do that, it just feels like I'm on a better mental path. And when things don't go great, or if I don't have, a really productive day in the studio painting, it's like, you know what? Like it's like, I have some mercy, for that, for myself. And I think that that's really valuable because I want to do this for the next 50 years. If I'm going to have that long, I'm almost 40. So I think, I can paint till I'm 90. But if I don't take care of myself, that's not going to be a reality,
Right.
And so we've got to take care of this body and this brain that's inside of us. It's the only thing we've got.
For sure. Yeah. And it's the primary thing from which we do everything, right? If it's not functioning, then we can't do the things. But I think you bring up a really good point with technology. And I would encourage everybody to find some sort of boundaries with your technology. What I personally am doing right now is, for most of the day, my phone is set that the only notifications that I will get are if my partner or my stepdaughter or my sister or my dad calls me. Like, everything else will not come through. I've had friends who have had crises, and I'll add them to that list. I'll let them know, hey, so we can be flexible. But especially as Cowgirl Artists of America started growing, that was so hard because I was getting Instagram, Facebook, website, like every place you could possibly get notifications. I was getting them, and they were constant. And everybody, please keep in mind that technology, especially social media apps, they literally hired psychologists to create apps that are addictive. And so you are potentially addicted to this thing and you don't realize it. I would highly encourage you, if you haven't read it, and anybody else, to read Digital Minimalism. It gives a lot of really good pointers for managing the digital sphere. And then if you're like me, for a long time, I had like 1,000 or more friends on Instagram for a while, or Facebook. I actually have only like 50 now because I kind of hate Facebook. But for years, I felt obligated to know what everybody was doing in their life. Like that random person in my math class who I never talked to, who was my friend on, why do I need to know what's going on in their life? And I think we need to remember that as humans, we were not made for this environment that we now find ourselves in. Yeah. It can be very useful for sure. Technology is amazing, but we were never created to know what was happening in all parts of the world. We were never created to know what every person we ever met is doing with their life. We were never created to know all the news all the time immediately. And we are bombarded. And for me, I felt guilty. I felt like I have to know all of these things. I don't know where that came from, but I did feel that way. And so just, again, I think there's this very big, like a really powerful thing we can do. And that is simply notice what we're thinking and notice how we're feeling. And when we start notice ourselves thinking and feeling in a way that's stressful and overwhelming, take a moment and say, where is this coming from? And then when you identify, can I reduce this or get rid of it? Because there's so much that we do without we're not even aware. It's like, checking all of the things in the morning, which I used to do all the time, and not checking my phone feels so much better.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great stuff. What was the name of that book again? Digital Minimalism?
Yes. Digital Minimalism. Also on the topic of like self-help sort of books, Brad Stulberg, I think it's Stulburg. He's on Instagram. I'd recommend following him. But he wrote a book. It's one of his more recent ones. So he wrote books about how to be highly productive. And then now he recently wrote a book about being productive with, I would say, a little bit more of a gentler, mindful approach. It was an amazing book. It was really good. So I recommend following him and reading that book. I wish I could remember what it's called, but I can't right now.
Well, even if you remember later, like we'll get some links down below the video and in the show notes. So I'll make sure that happens. So I think that's so important to talk about, this whole conversation around taking care of ourselves, minimizing stress. We owe it to ourselves to take care of ourselves, hands down, especially if we want to do this for the long run, which I can't imagine not being able to paint and not being able to do these things that I love. Like it's not even worth going there. So let's shift again. This Cowgirl Artists of America, you founded this. I personally, I wish I knew more about it. So I definitely want to hear kind of what it's all about. I know some, but also I want to please talk about how it's a resource for women artists. I think that's going to be extremely helpful.
Yeah, well, I'm excited to share more. One thing and you and I talked about this before, but one thing I want to point out is Cowgirl Artists of America is for everybody. So I know a lot of people hear cowgirl and they maybe if you're a man, you might think, oh, that doesn't apply to me. But cowgirls are making amazing art, right? And so that applies to us innately if we love Western art. We also, it's not something we really advertise a lot, but if a man believes in our mission and he wants to take advantage of what I think are really good resources, he's welcome to join. He just has to agree to the same agreements everybody else does.
Interesting. How would that work? I'm curious.
Yeah, well, we haven't had any men join yet. I just had the first one ask the other day, so we'll see if he joins. But honestly, I don't think it's a big deal. But I'm approaching this from a woman, right? And as a woman, I am familiar with living in a world that often speaks to men. For example, you can walk into a room and say, "Hey, guys," to a mixed group of people and nobody bats an eye. But if I walk into that same room and be like, "Hey, ladies," and then you're like, "What?" So I think it's really not a big deal. We're better together. We all have this passion of Western art and growing our art. And we have so many great resources that if you think you're going to benefit from them and you want to support and be a part in that way, we want to be with people, right? We have four core beliefs: community. There you go. Community is everybody. Education, collaboration, and promotion. And so I think that community and that collaboration aspect really fits into that. We don't want to have this exclusionary approach, but at the same time, our mission is to increase opportunities and representation for female Western artists and makers. And that is really important. I was inspired to kind of start this. It was on hold for a while, but in 2018, I went to a incredibly beautiful Western art show. Every piece was amazing, no doubt. And as I walked around, I saw the placards, which had the artist's name and bio and their photo. And I think with the photo, it just that I'm a visual person, as many of us artists are. It just made an impact stronger, even though I knew this already kind of. But I started thinking where are the women? I know a lot of really talented women. Where are they in this show? Why aren't they here? And so I thought maybe I'm just not remembering correctly. So I bought a catalog because I was really curious. And I crunched the numbers and it was only 9% female representation. Wow. And I was like, why is that way? And I started researching it a little bit more. And 9% is a number we see a lot, even in college textbooks. If there's any women at all, 9% is a pretty common number we see. And so we see now this awareness of hey, we haven't been talking about these women artists that have really been very talented and deserve to be in this, catalog of work for, college coursework or whatever. I think there's more awareness of that. And I think we're also starting to notice just in shows and stuff, if there's not many women. And I think it's our human nature to want to like point a finger and like blame a specific person or a specific thing and say, that's the reason this happened. And
Right.
I've certainly like had moments of that too, but I think the issue is quite complex. And I think the more that I do this, the more complex it becomes. And so while we see that many artists across the board struggle with maybe self-promotion, women really struggle with it because many women are taught to be more subdued and it doesn't feel feminine to market yourself that way.
Interesting.
And so there are so many things that contribute to why women aren't getting their work out. Or, a lot of them are caretakers for their children and they're really busy during the day. And that's a different thing that maybe they're dealing with that not all men deal with. Not that men don't, but it's a higher percentage of women doing those things. Yeah. And so we just want to take that whole approach of having education, having this wonderful community, and to be able to then create these resources so that women can show their work and build their resumes and get into shows. And it's kind of interesting when we think about like getting into these big shows, because there's almost this like vicious cycle, because what happens when you get in a museum show? It like, bam, like that's big for your reputation, right? And then you can raise your prices. And who do museums want? They want people who can have higher prices so they can make money too. It's a collaborative thing, and they need to cover their costs and they need to bring money in too. And so you have this cycle that I think it's good to have attention and awareness for, of that when we are drawing from the same well that we've always drawn from, it does in some way make it harder for people building to get to that point. Because it's easier to draw from, I don't know, the only person that's coming to my mind is Mark Majori, but he basically does his own thing because he's like the biggest thing in Western art right now. But it's easy to always go for that big thing, right? But these other people that can be just as talented in building their career, they might be kind of getting left out of that mix, which then also contributes to not being able to raise their prices as much. I don't know. Does that make sense? I feel like I explained it weird.
No, it does. And as I'm listening here, I think it is a complex issue, and I'm not just saying that because I'm a guy, but I think even just culturally, the typical household, the father figure is going to be, the provider who's out in the workforce. And if you have children, we've got the woman who is the mother, and she is the primary caretaker. And I don't want this to go anywhere ugly. I don't want that at all.
It's a common system. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think there's a lot of factors here that a lot of the issues derive from our culture, in the United States, in Western civilization, very Judeo-Christian foundations and things like that. And I wouldn't be surprised if, as far as the number of professional artists, I bet there are more men than there are women that are professional artists who at least consider themselves so, right?
So actually, you will be surprised because there are more women than men. But men, when you look at statistics, men have the highest percentage of the wealth in art.
Yeah, okay. I stand corrected. Honestly, that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it is. And I before we go further in this conversation, I think sometimes like there's this immediate thing of, well, men are better than women. I've heard people say this, and that's not true. Often you're seeing those really talented men because they're in these shows, right?
Yeah.
But there are incredibly talented women, and there's men that are not very talented, and there are women that are not very talented, and those are two different things, right? There's people who they still need to work on their skills, but there are people of both genders who are incredibly skilled, and it's just and so one thing that we to just kind of let people think of it from kind of a different angle. One thing that we, from the beginning, has been really important to us is ensuring that we're also supporting Indigenous women, because Indigenous women have the lowest representation, I think, in Western art. And they're, again, very complex issue, multiple things happening there. But we have purposefully tried to do some outreach. And so for this women's work show, which I'd love to talk more about later, we reached out to Indigenous women, like very purposefully, like, hey, we really want to make sure you know this opportunities for you, et cetera, et cetera. We had over 1,000 works submitted to this as samples for artists for the show, but we only had 5 Indigenous women apply. And so then I think that for organizations, we have to think, okay, what is the reason? Like, because we know there's talented Indigenous women artists, so what's the reason? How do we do better? And it can be really hard. And so I don't want to like negate the complexities of any of it. But I think a good practice is to be aware, first of all, are women being shown in this show? Are there very many women? And always keep in mind what story is not being told. Because another thing in shows a lot of times, and we're seeing more of it now, but there are many, like, imagine, like, close your eyes and think of a Western art show. Like, you see a bunch of cowboys, right? You see Indigenous men on horses with their spears, maybe getting water. What do the women look like if they're there, right? They're usually beautiful, young, taking care of a kid, almost always. But my great grandma trained a Mustang when she was 80. Wow. We who grew up in this world know that women are doing all of those things. And so I think sometimes it's like those habits of the brain, right? We jump to the things that we've seen. Yep. And so that's totally normal. But once you are aware of it, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And then you're like, oh, where are the cowgirls? Like, I saw my sister out there dragging calves the other day. Why is she not shown here? And I think that's not to say, boo to all this other stuff. It's to say, no, this culture is vibrant and beautiful, and so many different peoples from so many different backgrounds and genders contribute to this culture. How do we tell that full, beautiful, colorful story?
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like a fish out of water in this conversation in a lot of ways. And it's, I would love to say that I don't have some of these biases and things like that, but I probably do. And I just don't really understand, or recognize it. And, so I think this is valuable for everybody to hear, and, I guess I think being aware is one thing that will help. What other advice would you have for us as a collective body of artists, around this subject? What else needs to be addressed?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, you bring up something really important, and that's that fish out of water, uncomfortable feeling. And it's the same feeling I get when I'm trying to address this disparity with Indigenous women, right? Because I don't belong to that group. I don't know very much. And so I think reminding ourselves to just remember that we don't know what we don't know. Yeah. And I truly believe that there is no shame in being wrong. What becomes shameful is when we learn something and we decide to go, no thanks. I'm going to dig my heels in, even though I know better now. Yeah. And so there is nothing wrong with misspeaking. I mean, if you come in being like an arrogant jerk, of course, like that's not the way to approach that. But if you come in with like, I think humility towards any subject, which I try to do even with the things that I feel like I know about, because complexity, right? It's so complex. So not being so afraid of asking the questions and making the mistakes. And, sometimes it's a matter of talking to the right person too. So I think that's the first step. The second thing I think is to bring that awareness, like I said, because once you start seeing it, like my guess mark is now that when you go to the next Western show you go to, you're going to think, oh, I wonder how many women are here. And if there's not very many, you're going to be like, oh, I wonder why. And then you can start thinking, and again, I'm not saying any of these organizations are doing any of this on purpose. It's complex, and women artists have a role to play in this too. But you're going to wonder why. And then you can start thinking, well, what women could be here? I have a list in my phone of I keep adding. Anytime I see a woman Western artist who's I'm like, she's fantastic, I go and add her to that list just so that I have this list of people that are top of their game.
Yeah.
To bring that awareness. The next thing that we can do, so it's really interesting with computers and technology, because if there is, whether it's purposeful or accidental biases, we build that into our computer systems, and our algorithms inevitably express that. And so I did this experiment with Cowgirl Artists of America's Instagram, which I'm about to stop doing this, but I think I only followed 3 or 4 men on that page. But the main reason I did that is because I was curious if the algorithm would show me more women, because it was almost exclusively Western art was men. The only women it would show was when they were making purses or painting flowers. And I was like, what in the world? So as an experiment since 2021, I've been following female Western artists and female Western makers, and it didn't do anything to the algorithm. The algorithm still primarily shows me male artists. So it's really interesting. So that being said, one of the things that you can do is you can share, hey, I always go to Teresa Elliott because she's one of my favorites. Her work is beautiful. Have you seen Teresa Elliott's work? It's beautiful. You could look at this piece by Teresa Elliott, or, that's one thing you can do. The other thing is, if you are a person, whether artist or part of an organization where you have any sort of influence, and you notice that this is a thing, just, hey, I wonder why our balance of men and women is so off, because it theoretically should be a little closer to even.
Right.
Is there a reason this is happening? Feel free to use Cowgirl Artists of America as a resource. If you're like, hey, we're wanting to increase our female representation, we have had the hardest time and we don't know where to start. We are here to help you, because sometimes people are making these concerted efforts and they're just not getting anywhere. Again, it's complex.
Yeah.
But I think about, we have a silversmith who's one of our signature members, which is, by the way, very, very, very hard to get. Jill Latno Yamate, she does beautiful silver work. And she posted recently a post on Instagram about thanking the people who said her name and the places that she wasn't, et cetera, et cetera. Somebody, I don't want to say who it is because I feel like I'm going to say the wrong celebrity, but one of the singers carried her clutch that she made to the CMAs recently.
Wow.
And that's because somebody was in that space saying her name. And so I think that is such a powerful thing. Hey, do you know about so-and-so? That helps, because our community, and we can all acknowledge, I think that the arts were very male dominated for a long time, but that community is expanding to include women. And so how do we help be more inclusive in those communities that we all want to be a part of, and that we all have something valuable to contribute to?
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And I really appreciate your perspective here. And it's helping me to be, I think, a little bit more open and at least aware of this. And I think to say it's not an issue would be a terrible mistreatment of this whole conversation and really what's happening. But I do think that from my perspective, it feels like I see a lot of art, women artists at art events, art shows that I'm involved in. I see a lot of women in there, and maybe it's not just, but artists, women artists that are a part of these shows. And yeah, they're an absolutely necessary aspect to what these shows are, and they're irreplaceable. And some of the work that these women are doing it is unreal. It's beautiful. And it's just as good, if not better, in many times than anything I see a man produce. So
when I think it's kind of interesting too, going back to we talked about the rigidity of what is good art. Yeah. And something I noticed with women a lot, and I do this myself, so maybe that's why I noticed it. But a lot of women I think, who paint animals, like they will forego a lot of the background. And I've been thinking about that a lot, because sometimes people can oh, they don't know how to paint a background, or they don't. But I think for women, we're so relational that for me, like when I'm painting that animal, it is about that relationship with that animal. And I don't want to draw the attention away from that subject. And so I think there's also this area in which we can consider, like, what is the perspective being shared here? Like, these are compositional choices that this artist made, and maybe it's not the norm for Western or wildlife art, but is there a reason that they're doing that? And is my perspective that it's not as good based in a perspective from one group of people? Is that a perspective that's changing?
Yeah. It's valid. Very valid. So let's talk a little bit about the with some specifics with the Cowgirl Artists of America. You have that fourfold mission, and I can't repeat it right offhand. But as far as one of the questions I had was like, if there's a woman who's listening to this that has really no connection with Western art, maybe she's figurative, a little more landscapes, and doesn't consider herself in the Western genre, whatever she might be doing, how could that organization benefit her? And is that a good fit?
Yeah. So the way we answer that question for people is we have really good resources that we believe are going to be helpful to everyone. And you, by joining and getting those resources, you're getting something. You're also contributing to supporting our mission with your dues. And we are more than happy to accommodate that. Where the limitation applies is that you are probably not going to be getting into our shows because they are Western work, unless you're painting something Western for that. And our signature and pro membership, which is because we want to be able to help everybody at all stages. So basic membership is not juried, but signature and pro is juried. If you're not a Western artist, you cannot get juried into those because our mission is for the Western arts.
Yeah. And
so there are limitations for how far your membership will take you.
Nice. Okay. Well, that's very clarifying. But it sounds like there are some really great resources that would be available to them, and even a community, and things like that. So and I'll make sure I have a link to that below the show notes. So
cool.
Everybody can check that out. Let's see. I've got all these different thoughts going through my brain, and I'm trying to pick the one I want to land on. Let's go to this. If you had to start over with your art, we've got a lot of new artists, beginners, or people that are just trying to get their feet wet into the professional aspect of being an artist. Listening in, what would your recommendation be, or how would you approach your art career if you were just getting started right now? What would you do? Yeah,
that's such a hard question because before I answer it, I want to say that it is, again, so important to do the ugly work before you do the pretty work. And you have to have that time. You cannot rush the artistic process, but you obviously make gains faster the more work you put in. So I think there's a tendency with newer artists that they want to be top of their game right away. And that is an unrealistic expectation, both for your art skill and for your business.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. But that being said, I think I would such an interesting, because it's like a flower. It slowly unfolds, right?
Yeah.
But I think definitely focusing immediately on setting up good business procedures, ensuring that I have a good way to track my inventory and my work, having SOPs, so systems of procedure. For example, I just wrote one because I'm starting to try to implement this consistently. Us artists tend to be scatterbrained, right? Don't underestimate the value of writing down what you need to do. Because I'm trying to have this system where I finish the piece, I sign the back, I sign the back in pencil for myself and write the title. I go and fill out the certificate of authenticity, do all the things so it's all together and all ready. I think having those systems so that when you go to a show or you're at a festival or whatever it is, you aren't a scatterbrained artist like, oh my God, where did I put that thing? So you just have this calm presence. I think the other thing that I would probably try to keep in mind is just to be more gentle with myself. It's so easy to push ourselves really hard. You do not ever get a day. Once it's gone, it's gone. You never get it back.
Yeah.
And I think that is important to keep in mind how you spend that day. And sometimes that means that you take a few days off from your work and you go outside and you play with your kids. You go ride horses, you go camping, go watch a movie. I think for me, I have a tendency to work all the time. And it has created some problems for my well-being, which I'm getting better at, but definitely has created some times where there's been problems. I think the other thing that I would want to get better at, and this is something I'm still learning, but I think from the very beginning, it would be really good to take some sort of like finance class or find a mentor to be able to better plan your finances and kind of how to prepare. And I don't think a lot of artists feel ashamed if they're like doing work other than art. And there are talented people who do art on the side and they get their work into shows, and that's okay. I think it's easy to get into our passion and push ourselves maybe into a place that is not the best financially. And so being able, and I wish I could tell you the solutions. I don't, because I'm still learning, but, and then also having that business thing set aside, you need your separate bank account, you need all that. So it's so much easier for tax experts and whoever's working with you when you do your taxes, it keeps it all separate. And I guess that would be the other thing is don't be afraid to outsource the work that you're not good at. I outsource my taxes, my bookkeeping. I am not a numbers person. And so I want to rely on people who are good at that. And then I have more time to do the art and to focus on the things that I'm good at. I feel like I'm always expecting when I'm going to learn something better. So sometimes like a question like this, I'm like, man, I feel like tomorrow I'm going to be like, nope, there's a better answer for that. But I guess just being open to the process, and open to learning, and don't let ego get in the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe a couple more clarifying questions here is, I think social media is pretty much an absolute necessary for an artist today. And having some kind of online presence, if you were just getting started, what would you do there as far as that goes?
So I think if I was like today I'm starting my business, I would probably post a little bit onto social media before I started trying to get followers, because I think a lot of people, they start their Instagram and then they go try to get all these followers. People are going to go look at your page and they're like, one post or no post. Who is this person? Right. So I would post several things, at least 9 posts, I think, so they see a full grid view. Be thoughtful about your captions, show your personality, show your face. So many artists don't show their face. I would make sure my name was on my Instagram. The name, at least one of those 2 titles has to have your name. There are people who I have no idea who they are because their name is nowhere, not even on their website. It has happened. So your name needs to be everywhere. Make sure all of the images are beautiful to look at, which can be hard on Instagram. All of mine aren't necessarily beautiful either, because sometimes I'm like doing a video and I hate the way it looks, but if the content's good, it's okay. But you do want to be mindful of the aesthetic of it. And then, being thoughtful about your caption, your bio on social media. It needs to be very clear. I am a contemporary Western artist. Like, if I open up your page and it's a bunch of pictures of your dog and it says dog mom, coffee lover, life in the mountains, I have no idea who you are. Like, I'm not going to follow you as an artist because I don't know that you're an artist. Or if it says Western artist, but none of the photos show that you're a Western artist. Like, so I would be very mindful about, this is a business page. it is about business. It's okay to have a personal thing every once in a while, but it should be very clear that I am an artist and this is the type of thing I do. Here's my face. Here's my personality.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those are all really key points. And a lot of things that, what not to do. And I think, maybe to go along that vein, what do you see some artists do that you're like, that's a big mistake? Like what are some pitfalls that people should avoid?
Most of the time, politics and religion. I talk about religion on this a lot more than I ever do. I think those things can be a very important part of our lives. And there are ways in which you can approach them that are not divisive.
Yeah.
I think it's easy for artists to be like, well, that's who I am and that's part of my personality, so that's what I'm going to be. Well, you don't know who you're alienating, and at the end of the day, you're trying to sell your art. So I think it is better to, if not completely stay away from it, be very gentle about how you talk about it.
Yeah.
There's also ways if somebody is listening and they're like, oh, but this, my faith is like such a huge aspect of my life. And I believe that it is my mission to share that in everything that I do. Okay. Like if you feel that is your conviction about things, I am not telling you not to do that. There are ways in which you can do it. You can talk about love. There are ways you can talk about those things and share your values without, causing division and divisiveness. So I would be very, very careful about that on a business page. Look at any other big brand. You can even look up big brands that have values that they share and see how they do it. The other thing, I think the biggest thing is not having the name. It's amazing how many artists will not have their name on something, or it's like their business page, but there's no way to know it's a business page. It's their dog and their farm and their kids. And you really need to have a designated space for your business to take it seriously. And as soon as you can, once you decide that you're trying to really be professional, you do need a website. I don't think that's necessary when somebody's just getting started and they're just kind of sharing their work. But when you're getting ready to apply for shows and you want people to take you seriously, even if you're not selling off of your website shows people that you're the real deal.
Yeah, I like that. That's valuable. Those are all really exceptional points. Did you have any mentors that kind of helped you outside of school? That whole that your higher education. What other artists have inspired you or have helped you to get where you're at?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really feel that my mentors haven't been as much for art for the most part, honestly, more for the business side of things. And okay. I really hope I'm not leaving anyone else. And if I am, I'm sorry, it is my brain and it does crazy things. Yeah. I think I've always called my dad and asked him for advice. He's been a successful businessman, and I'm always like, what do I do here? Blah, blah, blah. I always have believed that there's, this idea of wise decisions are made with the counsel of many. And I think about that a lot. And so with CGA, we've had an advisory board almost since the beginning. And I think having people, and I purposefully chose people who did not think just like me. Because I think that that's really important. And so I think mentors can come in so many ways, but Morgan Booker is a cowboy boot maker. Peggy Judy is a painter. They both have really given me a lot of advice. Koala Evans, oh my gosh, Koala and I have had the longest conversations. And just, people, everybody on our board, I know I'm not listing everybody on our board, but Jackie Sevier, and she has given me a lot of insight about helping to reach out to Indigenous artists and things like that. And so I could not even begin to list the people who have supported me, but I think my mentorship for the most part looks a little bit more informal than what it might be. I did finally get a mentor recently who I've been talking to a little bit, but I think a lot of it has been really valuable friendships.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Oh man. I don't know why I'm having a brain fart right now.
That's okay. Brains do weird things.
Yeah.
And my brain goes a million directions. So probably every time I answer your question, you're like, oh my gosh, that was way more than I expected.
No, it's good. Okay. I had a couple of thoughts with your art process. Let's dive into that a little bit. What is your approach to your painting? How do you start a painting? Do you have your ideas come from images that you're taking and then evolve into paintings, or do you have an idea that's developed into art? How does that all play out? I'd love to hear your process.
Yeah, so it's kind of changed a little bit recently. I was like using other people's photos, Mandy Frank is a rancher and she's allowed me to use 2 of her photos to paint. And then I've used like some licensed photos and stuff. So a lot of times it was more focused on like, oh, I want to paint this animal. Now I'm really trying hard to get as many of my own reference photos as possible so that I have my hand in every part of that process.
Yeah.
And then it's just really about what photo is speaking to me. Right now, one of my goals is I really want to strengthen my composition. So I've been like really more exploring thoughts about that. So I kind of have some ideas for like the way animals move and things like that. But typically once I find the photo that I want to use, I get it sketched out and laid down, that. And it's so hard to say my process because honestly it changes a bit each time, it's because it's so intuitive. But I typically will put down the shadows and the background, and then I kind of start building those up. And I start with pretty vivid colors usually.
Okay.
And then at first my work was pretty washy and more blocky, and now I am a lot more interested in texture and fine detail. And there's always this element of how are the colors playing together. And so every time that I'm painting, usually an artist that are new listening, they all, almost every single painting, I'll be curious, Mark, if this is true for you. I feel that almost every painting I paint has an ugly phase where I'm like, oh my gosh, that looks terrible. Do yours do that?
More often than not, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It always looks bad. But you get to the point where you expect that to happen,
Right.
and you know that there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, it's like the gangly teenage phase.
Yeah. If I keep pushing, it's going to come together. And I always end up believing that because I've been able to push through it enough to know, yes, it's going to come together.
Yeah, so don't be afraid of it. Just say trust the process, keep going, it will all work out. I literally used to have to do that all the time. Now I just know. But so it gets its ugly phase. And then at some point, as I keep working on it, there is every time this moment, it's literally a moment where the colors all of a sudden, bam, they are playing together. What I say is they start to sing. And when they start to sing, that's when the fun work comes, because then that's when I'm really like, I just visually, when I look at it, it's almost like I anticipate what color needs to come next, which is kind of, I feel like a little easier to say when you're using realistic colors, but these are not, I'm using teals and purples and all kinds of things, which are really in life, but we're not seeing them that way.
Yeah.
But anyway, and so then that's when I start playing with the texture and things like that. And, sometimes finding out when they're finished, it's just a feeling, you get for that piece. And sometimes it's that you got to set that piece aside for 2 weeks and not look at it so you can really decide. And sometimes you're just like, yep, that's it. Used to, after I signed it, I would never do anything else to it. And I've discovered, this is a very weird thing I've discovered about myself, is that after I sign it and after I post it on Instagram, I almost always inevitably notice one more little thing I want to do. And I think it's because I've taken that stress off myself. I'm like, it's done. And then I'm like, oh, no. And so now I will sometimes go back and be like, I'm going to tweak that little thing. But then I figure if anyone steals it on Instagram, I'll be able to say, oh, you got that from Instagram because it wasn't done.
Yeah, that's nice. The whole process of painting to me is it's this evolving beast, this animal that is ever changing. I look at when when I was just getting started in my processes, and how it just over time, it just changes and shifts and evolves. And, is there anything recently that you've shifted in your approach? I'm curious.
I think the texture, and I've been doing even more specific bold backgrounds than like used to. I would just do one color, and I've been experimenting more with like some texture in the background, or maybe like a very strong line. But for a long time I painted and I didn't get really detailed, because honestly, getting details with the color I'm using can be really challenging. It can go wrong really easily.
Yeah.
But I've been doing this style for about 9 years now, I think. And so now I've developed this ability to start adding that texture, and I am really loving that. Getting just playing with all those little things. But I do feel like every painting I do is a conversation. And sometimes it's like the painting says, I don't want that. Like, that's not where we're going. And I just trust that intuitive process. And maybe I don't include it. But the next thing I really do want to start playing with is different, paying more attention to the actual shape of the subject. A lot of times it's just like, yeah, that's a visually appealing image, like maybe this barrel horse is like reaching out really far and you can tell they're trying, and that's what I'm communicating. But I recently did some photos down at La Jolla in California of these pelicans in all these like interesting positions, and I think I want to do a series playing with those movements of animals.
That's cool. Yeah, I really enjoy getting out and photographing animals, and I feel like that's one of the ways that keeps me engaged in the process. Getting out and seeing them and photographing them and going back and looking at all the cool, the ways that they're communicating or expressing and whatever it is. And yeah, I love that whole process.
Yeah.
To kind of shift back to a little bit of the basics of running an art business, how do you find the balance between like the CGA and your painting? I know you're highly involved and that's probably requiring more and more of your time. The CGA is, I'm assuming. So how do you create or maybe balance isn't even the right word. How do those things coexist in your life?
Well, first, if anybody has any ideas for me, feel free to email me, megan@cowgirlartsofamerica.org. But it's funny because I'm really working on this stress and this question. I'm like, oh man, my neck feels tense. But it is a work in progress. I have always had the mentality that if I work hard enough, I can make it happen. And I know how to work to a fault. And that's the approach I've taken since 2021. And so I've been trying to find better balance. Unfortunately, my art really got almost totally pushed aside the first year. When CGA started, I was like, people kept asking, like, can I join? And I didn't have a way to do that. But lots of people kept asking. So I was like, well, I guess I need to do this. So I thought, I was like, we were going to be lucky if we got 20 members on our first enrollment. And we had 146. So wow. It was like there is an immediate need for me to suddenly do a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't do things halfway. I always try to do things really well. And so I suddenly found myself in this place of having this beautiful and amazing thing that I'm passionate about that also is suddenly a lot. And so I think the first year of CGA, I think maybe if I'm lucky, I painted 7 paintings. I didn't hardly do anything. I just didn't have the time. And I've been, especially since in the last 2 years, I've tried to be really a lot more mindful of that. And luckily I did paint more last year. But it is a challenge. And I think I'm trying to reassess what things are necessary and what things are not. Because one of my kind of epiphanies from the silent retreat this weekend is that I have this incredible ability to solve problems, not just my problems, everyone's problems all the time. I was walking through this little labyrinth, which if you don't know what that is, people listening or whatever, it's just kind of like a little circular maze that's made for contemplation. And I was noticing that there was all these weeds because it was like rocks. And I was like, I wonder if these are here to be like natural, like, or do they want them weeded? Because a goat would totally clean this up for them. No problem. And before I had walked the next 3 turns, I had an entire plan of action in my head about how they could get a goat and volunteers. And then I was like, what am I doing? No one asked me to solve this problem. It maybe isn't even a problem. And so that's what happens when I'm working, is that I will be like answering an email and suddenly I'm like, oh, I could do this. This would be a great resource. And I am halfway down the rabbit trail before I realize, oh my gosh, this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I think right now the main thing is learning how to be much more mindful about my approach to work and what is necessary and what isn't. And I'm really trying to focus on this idea that the more, how does the quote go? I think it's the more time we make for things, the less time we have. And so I'm trying to only make time for a few things.
Yeah.
And it has been interesting because I've been feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm getting behind. There's all these things I have to do. But when I wrote down my list, it wasn't as bad as I thought. And so I thought, maybe this is because I'm not chasing like 5 different rabbit trails for every task. So I don't know that I have a great answer for you, besides that I am trying really hard to figure it out, because my art is really important to me. And it's important to me to help other people. And obviously I'm very passionate about it. I'm dedicated a lot of time for it. But at the end of the day, we can't draw from an empty well. Yeah. And so I have to find ways to take time for myself and also to cultivate my art. Like I've been doing a lot of little studies recently, because I'm very slow at painting. Typically, it takes me a long time to get a piece complete. And so I've been challenging myself with time limits and doing more of a study, which some of them I've really liked, but then there's a couple that I'm like, I don't like this that much, but it's like a kind of a lower barrier to entry sort of piece for both the collector and for myself. Yeah. But I'm really like thinking, like, is that really the right choice? Like, because I don't know what the answer is, but I guess it's probably good for people to hear that people get confused with their direction. I just know that those things don't make my heart sing like my fully fleshed out pieces do. And while they might be a fun part of the process, do I really want to dedicate my time to that? Or do I need to like find a different way to manage it so that I can get to those big pieces that I love, that are what my work is about? I think for artists, it's a never ending process. There's always going to be something. And when you're your own boss, that can be good or bad.
Right. And I think as I'm contemplating this whole episode and this conversation that we've had, I feel like one of the main themes here has to do with just making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, and avoiding the pitfalls that come from just overworking and kind of, enslaving ourselves to this process of creating and neglecting other really important aspects of our life. In the end, there's a price to pay for that. And a lot of times that price is really steep.
Yeah. I think that's where that morning mindfulness is so helpful, because I found that for so many, like for 2 or 3 years now, I've been totally reactive about everything. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. Like I've been like having a temper, but every action I've taken has been reactive. Well, we can't plan and get far when everything's reactive. So we need to like slow down, get our footing, and then say, okay, like what's the plan? And how do I start? And that's where that mindfulness comes in. And I don't know if there's any people who ride dressage listening. There's something in dressage called a half halt. And it's like, you don't really stop the horse, but you kind of, in their motion, you kind of give them this moment of, hey, like pause in this. And it allows them to reset themselves in the way that they need to be. I don't know if that's the best description, but I think about that a lot for myself, that sometimes I just need a little half halt to be like, oh, no, I'm not doing it that way.
Yeah. Just a come back to reality for just a second here, recoup. I think sometimes when I'm in the studio, it's like I have this kind of like this 9 to 5 mentality, and I have to. It's like I'm pushing through. When sometimes it's like, what, I'm feeling really tired right now, and there's been times when I'm better at this than others, but I'm like, what, I'm going to lay down for 10 minutes and have a little nap. And it's crazy, but even just something like that, just a little reset or something, it makes the next several hours of work so much more productive than they would have been if I had just kind of just tried to force my way through it, and go through that tired phase. I think those little things pay off, massively.
Yeah, because you can spend 5 hours working on something tired that would maybe take you 30 minutes if you were fresh, And so, there's so much value to that. And it's really hard because what it comes down to is breaking our habits and creating, not only breaking them, but replacing them with a healthy one. And that's really hard.
Right. Yeah. Oh, well, I hope we haven't driven too many people to want to go see a psychotherapist. But that might be a really good thing.
Yeah, there's no shame.
Yeah, there really isn't, and I'll be honest, I've worked with therapists before, and it sounds like you have. And I think, there really is no shame in that. And that's something that maybe some people should look into.
And if you don't mind, a couple of tips if you do want to see a therapist, because I firmly believe in talking about all the things and taking away the shame so that we can help each other be healthier, happier people. So when you're looking for a therapist, find somebody that you feel comfortable with. And sometimes that maybe for a woman, she doesn't want to meet with a man. Maybe she's had some trauma with men or something, or vice versa. That's totally okay. Like, look for those things that you need. And then if you meet with a therapist and you just don't jive with them, they're not right, don't go to that therapist. They are not all good. For me, I really want somebody intuitive that's going to give me feedback. I don't want to just hear myself talk the whole time. And I found that, and like I've said, I've worked with my therapist off and on since 2018. And she's amazing, and she has helped me to have so much growth. She's helped me to be more successful in the things I do. So, if you go to one and you're like, that person was not very good, that doesn't mean all therapists are bad. Yeah. It just means they weren't the right one for you.
And unfortunately, you can hire and fire anybody that's, and you hire the people that work for you and fire the ones that don't,
Right.
And we don't have enough energy in our lives to go to everybody and everything. Another thing I would recommend, I think life coaches or any kind of a coach, there's a lot of, I think with the advent of technology and so much, that's all these online resources, there's a lot of options out there as far as coaches, and you can find business coaches, you can find life coaches, you can for anything
coaches.
yeah, exactly. And there's really no shame in reaching out, and when you pay for those things, a lot of times that's important because you're more invested and you get more out of it that way. So anyway, well, Megan, I think this has been a phenomenal conversation, and I really appreciate you being open, especially about the struggles that you faced and the challenges. And I think that this, it's so easy to try to paint the picture of, everything is just great, all the time. And we always we promote and we push all those really great things, when in a lot of realities, we have this other aspect of our lives that's kind of ugly and awkward and frustrating and challenging. And it's not authentic, and it's misleading, I think, in a lot of ways. And so this is a breath of fresh air. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I think especially with the CGA, I think that's a phenomenal resource, and I'm going to look it up and see, if there's something in there that I could benefit from. I know I can apply for the shows and things like that because I'm not a woman, but there's probably some things in there that would benefit me, and I'm at least going to look into it. And
and if we get enough men, we can do, a co-ed show or something. That could be a fun thing to do. So like I said, we're all about collaboration. There's probably something you and I can do together with CGA and with what you're doing as well, because, it's so exciting to see all the things that you're doing. I'm really, really excited to see what happens with that.
Well, thank you so much. And, Yeah, thanks again, and happy painting, and we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Yep. Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Art podcast. If you're interested in resources and education to help you successfully create art and then sell it, please check out the Business of Art course in the link below. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.